Really?
Nice.
Well, and you're closed tomorrow through the end of the week, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Oh.
Well, the fireplace is a fantastic addition.
Really like it.
We're warming our Tootsies over there.
Grab another one.
That will be awesome.
Listen to cooking.
Yeah.
They said we shouldn't have to use our heat all winter long. So
I believe it because it feels warm in that room.
yeah, turned it in 58 when I came in this morning, and within half an hour, 70.
I just need the heat to travel down here. My ankles turn into ice cubes everywhere I go. Everywhere else is
You have
fine.
long socks?
Oh yeah.
Oh,
You
man.
guys-
Jeez, well, you're just screwed. I'm sorry.
It's just
Poor
my feet.
circulation, maybe?
It's just my feet.
There's no saving you.
Double layers. Knee-high nylons and then the first one's over
If
the
I-
like more people.
I have knitted socks that I wear at home, like, and I'll put those on and they cover from my ankles down. Then I'm like,
Sorry, just
Our grandma faces to every Christmas buy us fuzzy socks.
Ooh,
fuzzy
fuzzy.
Nice.
socks are the best. I only wear fuzzy socks at home. They
I
just
should
don't-
get some fuzzy
You
socks.
should. Laura knows I always ask her to borrow her guest. We call them guest socks now.
Guest
because
Guest socks.
I'm like, I need something thick on my feet.
Well, today is an important day in any C.S. Lewis fan's life.
You're right. It's the day John
Oh.
F.
Kennedy died.
Wow, that's I forgot again.
Yeah.
Today is the day.
And also,
I should do a post.
Aldous Huxley.
Oh, Huxley died today too.
Yeah, it was Huxley, Kennedy, and Lewis all died the same day.
Oh man, I didn't
It's
know
a
Huxley
it's a
died.
trifecta. That was
That's
important.
I like C.S. Lewis because he wrote India.
Yes, because
Who
it
doesn't it?
was very important. So, yeah, Nina and I have been to the grave.
I've cried at the grave.
Cried at the grave. We left a little lion at the grave,
Oh, and someone left $20 there.
and
Like pounds or
I don't know. I
dollars?
think it was pounds. Was it 20 pounds? 10
Oh.
pounds? Something like that. And one said, I think you can take that. And I'm like, really? And I took it. Like, someone gave it to...
Jack doesn't need it. He was going to buy beer with it anyway, if you know the quote.
It's true. And we were living there and quite poor, so I was like, all right, I'll take it.
Take this divine intervention.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a pretty special place, that cemetery and that church.
Yeah, that was we were there several times at the Quarry Holy Trinity
Oh, it's beautiful.
in Headington. But so today we're going to start with that hideous strength. THS, as it's known in any of my work that you'll see when I'm writing it, it's THS. So Nina's like, don't shorten it. But this is the it's not like BRB. This is a modern day fairy tale, and I like that. And I think if we pulled on the threads correctly, and David and Caitlin also mentioned this, I think Paralandra can be seen as a fairy tale when you look at it through the lens of the Silver Chair. I think there's some definite overlaps there that Silver Chair, like Paralandra, could also be more... You could tell Lewis was moving in his direction at this point. He'd gotten to the point where he's like, how is my message best? Oh, it's fairy tales is the best way to get my message across. Narnia, that hideous strength, fairy tales. And he mentions that's why it's a little... It's not like Out of the Silent Planet dry, but it's a little dry in the beginning because he has to set everything up. He's got to put the things in place because the dominoes are going to fall. If you don't get the dominoes right in the beginning, then the rest of the book's not going to fall correctly.
Yeah, I found that when he started, because I've read this before, but it's been a few years, and I felt that same way. I'm kind of like, all right, whatever. And I read it all, but then, when you get to like, kind of when James had her dream, not in the beginning, but like when she's talking about her dream, and then she's so messed up, she calls Mother Dimble, right? That's her name. And then she is on her way to Edgestowe, and so is it the same place? Yeah, Mark is on his way to Edgestowe too, right? Is it the same place they're going to?
Edgestowe's where they live.
Okay. She's going to Saint whatever.
Anne's.
St. Anne,
Anne's.
and he was going to Belbury.
But like I feel this, like I felt the excitement that I felt when I first read it.
Yeah.
Like when she starts going this way and he starts going that way.
I think that's very astute to see that there are two roads diverge in the yellow woods.
I saw a drone transition shot.
Ooh, nice.
Lifting up from the car, going over the field, just going over another field, and then there's the train and in through the window, and then she's sitting there very angry. But I'm kind of coaching that a little bit. It's been done before.
But this doesn't matter.
Yes, but see, you do the stuff. We just enjoy it. So for us, we're like, yes.
Do that. So I thought, since this is a fictionalization of Abolition of Man, I thought I might read a little bit of Abolition of Man to kind of set the stage for us on what's coming. The operation of the Green Book and its kind is to produce what may be called men without chests. It is an outrage that they should be so commonly spoken of as intellectuals. This gives them the chance to say that he who attacks them attacks intelligence. It is not so. They are not distinguished from other men by any unusual skill in finding truth or virginal ardor to pursue her. Indeed, it would be strange if they were. A persevering devotion to truth, a nice sense of intellectual honor, cannot be long maintained without the aid of sentiment which Gaius and Titius could debunk as easily as any other. It is not the excess of thought, but the defect of fertile, generous emotion that marks them out. Their heads are no bigger than the ordinary. It is atrophy of the chest beneath them that makes it seem so. I love that imagery. It's not that they have larger brains, it's that their chest is smaller, so it's an illusion. But illusion that they've bought into. Gaius and Titius have bought into the illusion of, oh, our brains are smarter than everyone else. It's like, no, your chest is just smaller. And all the time, such is the tragicomedy of our situation. We continue to clamor for those very qualities which we are rendering impossible. You can hardly open a periodical without coming across the statement that what our civilization needs is more drive or dynamism or self-sacrifice or creativity. In short of ghastly simplicity, we remove the organ and demand the function. We make men without chests, expecting of them virtue and enterprise. We laugh at honor and are shocked to find traitors in our midst. We castrate and bid the geldings be fruitful. So as we set this up, this for me, and does someone want to read the opening quote to that hideous strength? The Old English version.
Randy.
The opening quote.
Well, there's a quote at the beginning, very, very beginning.
I just got,
I don't know.
What, is there the shadow of that hideous...
Yes, there you go.
Border, it's like...
I don't have that.
More, it's like... It's on the title page.
It's in the title page.
There at the bottom.
So read it again.
The shadow of that hideous strength, sex mild and gory, is of like to David Lindsay from On Dialogue describing the Tower of Babel.
So what are we dealing? We're dealing with language and the devolution of language by men whose self-aggrandizing image of themselves make themselves more important than they actually are. And so that's going to be a theme throughout the book as we have language. And so Sir David Lindsay says, I don't know where he got this from. I haven't gone too far in this, but sax means 6. 6 miles, a shadow, the Tower of Babel would cast. That's how big it was. And so we're looking at, this is a Tower of Babel. This is a fairy tale, the Tower of Babel situation of creating generations of men without chest. Go. That's kind of what we're doing here. All right. So the first 5, 6, 7, 8 chapters. What did you guys think? Besides it being a little slow, what struck you? What didn't strike you? What themes have you picked up on? Any cannons fired? Do you hate it? Do you love it?
I had an interesting moment with it at the beginning of this time around where I realized that part of the reason that I didn't get into it as much in the past is that he doesn't save the cat with either of the protagonists. And that's always a problem for me when investing in story. There has to be a save the cat. Otherwise, I have a very difficult time wanting to I'll get there. Wanting to identify the character.
Help.
So, like, when you save the cat at the beginning of a story, you have to essentially give the reader something to latch onto that they like about the character that makes them identifiable and interesting. So, with the save the cat scenarios, like at the beginning of films, you'll actually have like a character, like sometimes they'll be walking back home and then there's a cat stuck in a tree and they're like, oh, okay, I'll get it down. They like put up a pole and like let it run down their arm or whatever. So that kind of like just kind action or that kind of thing that makes us
So like
them.
Harry Potter talking to the snake
Yes.
at the beginning of the Philosopher's
Exactly.
Stone. Okay.
That's a great example. Or like sort of like Luke in Star Wars when he goes to give the droids back to Ben, even though he's not supposed to do that, and then he treats C-3PO well and all that stuff, even though he's a droid. That kind of stuff. Save the cat. And these two characters, you get to like them, but it takes a lot longer.
There's nothing striking about them.
No, there's nothing striking about them at all. And that's part of his point. And I can see why he was doing it, but I do understand now, like reading it, why I and many other people like are put off by the characters right from the start.
Yeah.
And it's because they're just they're not terribly likable. They're not unlikable. They're just like, there's nothing about them that you're like, oh man, you're hard done by, or you got it rough, or I like how you love that person.
Right.
But you do start to see glimpses of it as the plot goes on, and that makes you like them more. What he does instead is he tries to peel back the layers of the character as they're going through the plot. They're like, I really want this thing, and you want them to want that thing. And so you see they're like exposing their vulnerabilities here and there. Like when she goes to St. Anne's and she starts talking to Miss Ironwood, it's like you want her to be friends with these people.
Yeah.
And like you see her like vulnerability open up. Oh, come on, you can do it. No. And she closes back down, but that actually makes you invested in the character. But it takes till chapter 3 for you to get there.
That's right.
So that's why it's
because they're both dull.
Yeah, quite dull.
They're quite dull in the beginning. It's like, why should I invest in your life? Why are you telling me you guys don't? There's no. It's a loveless marriage. He's an intellectual. She's an intellectual of sorts. Now, there's an interesting point here that I don't know what to do with it because I haven't really looked into this a whole lot because I can't remember what's been said about it. Necessarily, I'm going to go back and research it, but there's an importance to John Donne being the focus of Jane. And I was reading a little bit of John Donne today. He is a metaphysical poet and a really renowned metaphysical poet of the 16th century. And so that plays a part in it, why she's focusing on John Donne and then why she can't complete it. Right? There's a reason why she can't complete. She wants to get back into her dissertation, but she can't. She's never been able to get back into it. She thought she could just like riding a bike. I'll hop into it. I'll get right back into it. But then dreams and things like that start to happen. So I know there's an explanation for it. I just can't remember it. And if you guys had heard that or thought about that,
I think I looked it up one time and I forgot.
Yeah, that's the same here. I thought I had a good handle on it, but I started reading. It's like I don't have as good a handle on it as I thought I did. So. All right. So they're dull characters.
One thing about you're going on about Jane like that at the end of chapter 3 there, where she's leaving Miss Ironwood's Ironside, whatever her name is. Even when she discovered that she was going to marry Mark, if he had asked her the thought, but I must still keep up my own life, had arisen once, and had never, for more than a few minutes at a stretch, been absent from her mind. Some resentment against love itself, and therefore against Mark, for thus invading her life, remained. She was at least very vividly aware of how much a woman gives up in getting married. Mark seemed to her insufficiently aware of this. Though she did not formulate it, this fear of being invaded and entangled was the deepest ground of her determination not to have a child, or not for a long time yet. Mm. 1 had one's own life to live.
Yeah.
Keep repeating that. 1 has one's own life to live. and she's closing herself off from everything so that she can live her own life.
Mm-hmm.
Not realizing that she's not living her own life because she wants so desperately to live her own life. And
Yeah.
it's so sad.
And Mark's sort of living his own life too, being a part of the college. That's a whole nother. That's like a completely different life over there. Well, maybe he's going to call me at tea time and say he's stuck in a meeting and it's going to go longer than normal. I mean, the communication between them is sparse, if at all, and it's just like he's over here doing his thing. She's going to stay home and do her thing.
She's proud he's not interested.
She's resentful. She's resentful of being married. He's indifferent in the sense about being married. So it's like, yeah, why am I investing?
They pretty much just had one talk together through this whole first third, right?
Yeah.
Like just the one time.
Yeah.
And they both act as if
It's all in the text.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's all.
Yeah.
It's all right. So what's your first? So it starts getting good. I mean, the thing that draws me in immediately is when she reads the paper.
Yeah, well, I think her story is much more interesting to me.
Oh, it
and, in some ways, but that's also because I have an absolute aversion to the kind of people that Mark is dealing with, and him. I just like. I'm like, dude, you're the biggest idiot in the world, and sometimes it's like
It's a terrible hero.
Oh, yeah, he's awful. But yeah, totally forgot the question. But anyway,
No, Jane. You like Jane better than Mark.
yeah, by
Her story's better.
Long shot. Yeah, whenever she starts getting into the dream stuff, then I'm like, okay, here's the fantasy element. Now I'm kind of curious as to what's happening. And also her unsettledness. That's what I like. I like that it shakes her.
Yeah.
And from an outsider's perspective, of course, you want the protagonist to be shaken, but that's the last thing they want, right? Which is why it's good. But
A little bit of the unknown,
yeah, exactly.
or a lot of it of the unknown.
But also the other thing about this book that's really interesting, it takes the reason I think another reason it takes so long to get going is because this is wholly unlike either the first two in terms of character and plot structure. Mm-hmm. You have two diverging plots that eventually, but it with many characters, so many characters. By chapter 7, it's just like you're trying to remember the names. You're like, wait a minute, which one is this guy? Is he the Italian dude? Yeah, that's right.
So you're right. So up to this point, we've had Out of the Silent Planet, which had 3 characters and a bunch of non-human characters, but only the Haras, and then a couple of the Sorns.
Yeah, they only have 3 names.
Oyarsa, and so and then you get into Paralandra, and there's only 3 people in the entire 4 if you count 4 people, and then the Eldil, and then you get into this, and the narration changes. Now we're back to a narrator.
It's so constant.
In the story.
I'm like Busby, Curry.
Yeah.
Strake, Philostrato,
Featherstone, who also has
Featherstone, who has another name.
I'm like, I have to keep going back again and again to remember who everyone is. I'm starting to get it, but
Frost, Wither.
Withers.
Those noses.
He started going on. Who's the very epitome of what the aboriginal man talks about?
Yes.
Stuff and never gave a straight answer and just constantly pontificating and making it sound so important, and yet he wouldn't say a damn thing.
Right. Yeah. So I definitely think for me, what ties these 3 books together, besides Ransom, is the aspect of the transpositional language. So I think what you have in Out of the Silent Planet is you have going to find out there is a higher language, and what would happen in a world if that language were spoken and there was open communication with the higher language, because we're at a silent planet, and so we don't have access to the solar language and the Oyarsa and the Maleldil direct communication. So our language is going to be stunted. Well, the Malacandrins, they had their language is a little closer to being the higher to the lower. And then you get the Paralandra, where it's a direct connection to Maleldil. There is no interference. It is the high language. It is transpositional, but it's almost at the same level. And then you come into that hideous strength, and we're right back into the constipated, metaphorical Thelacondran language. And we're devolving because we're going to the Tower of Babel. So language is about to come unglued through this. And so the theme of language and understanding its purpose, I think, ties all three of these books together and makes it just one big dissertation on the necessity of seeing language as higher to lower and not lower to higher. So that's my soapbox. I'll hop off. So
Lily was the only one that heard me sing Into the Unknown. She came over and commented on it.
Oh, nice.
She's like, I liked it when you sing that. I was like, thank you for noticing.
So so we start getting the fiction, the fantasy type, when she has a dream, and then the next day it comes true. And then kind of, yes. Well, like as a dream can come true. As a dream can come true. So,
which I think is one of the things that unsettles her, is that it's just close enough, but not exactly. Because if it was exactly, then it wouldn't give her any doubt. But it's like, but he pulled off his head.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so you can actually go with a little bit of a Sherlockian axiom here when she's trying to figure out, is this real or not? Once you've eliminated the impossible, all that remains is the truth, no matter how improbable it may seem. Well, maybe I saw this guy's face yesterday. Well, maybe I did this. Maybe there was a reason why he was in my dream. It's like, nope, there is no other option other than this was a divine dream. And she's going to have to wrestle with this notion, which is foreshadowing things that are to come. And language and dreams are also another form of language between the metaphysical and the physical. And so it's another aspect of language going on here. Did anybody find just... I loved it, and it was also a little boring, but I did love the college meetings and how manipulative they were in the college meetings, and how... You know what?
Juniors, so good at that.
Juniors, you guys, we don't have enough money for you guys to eat. We don't have enough money for you to do this, and just... They did all the negatives, and they're like, but guess what?
If
we sell this land...
It's sales. Well, that's what it is.
Yeah.
It's sales. You create a sense of scarcity, and then you
Yep.
just kind of swoop in with the solution.
It's nonstop manipulation. I like
It's
Feverstone.
nonstop.
Yeah.
He's still like, after the meeting with Busby and Curry, and they walk out, he just talks about what idiots they are.
Yeah.
And
And
they're
they're
just
all
pawns.
manipulating each other.
They're all manipulated.
And
Yes.
I'm like, how is Mark not thinking? Right now, Mark is like, ooh, I'm on the inside with Fiverstone, and he's not thinking about the fact that he's being manipulated by him as well.
So if you guys have read the entirety of Weight of Glory, this will be of no surprise to you, because in Membership and the Inner Ring, you see exactly what's happening. Because once you get inside the inner ring, you find out there's another inner ring. And there's another inner ring. And there's another inner ring. And what you want is you want to be in that inner ring. But every time you go, there's another layer to get to. And so it's read the inner, go read the Inner Ring or the Membership and Weight of Glory, and this will totally Mark's character will totally make sense to you. But he's not a character that I like really at all. He has no redeeming qualities up until the end of the book. Does he start to have some redeeming qualities? Up to this point, he's all about himself.
He's an idiot.
He's pretty much he's an idiot.
It's supposed to be a sociologist.
Supposed to be a sociologist. Yeah.
Does it come off as a sociologist?
Yeah.
No.
I think if there's one character I don't think is quite well written in this book, it might be him for me, because I just can't imagine anyone that dumb, like, really being good enough at their job to do it. But I don't know.
Well,
it does happen sometimes, but he's just so dense about.
Well, here's the thing. So let's pull it now, because I think that's a brilliant observation. But let's go back to the men without chests, right? He would be thick if he didn't get the foundational knowledge of how to think or the Platonic or the Aristotelian type thinking, he wouldn't have imagination and reason. He would be simply pulled about by every wind of doctrine and just go, whatever sociological theory of the day, that would be what he would gravitate towards, because he wouldn't have the ability. He'd be the gelding trying to go out and multiply. But you can't. But I'm a stallion. I'm a thoroughbred. No, you're a gelding. And so maybe that's the point. Maybe that Lewis's point is, here's a guy who thinks he's fertile, but actually he doesn't have a chest. He's another one, and he doesn't get the chest until later.
Yeah, maybe. I feel like intuition has to play some part in character, and I just don't see him having any, which is kind of just bothersome to me. But maybe I'm superimposing my own intuition on other people. But well,
he does have bits of intuition.
He just tends to shut them off very quickly.
Yes.
He's also weighing his options and
yes.
I should go this way, but then again, if I do this, then I
But my
can't do
little
this.
boy brain is coming out. I'm
There you go.
enjoying this. This is just make believe.
Lizard brain is what it is.
He's got yes.
Lizard brain.
Yeah, the lizard brain. I think that's and so that's probably another thing that you see in here. But I think it's a fair point to say maybe he's not very well written, but also maybe Lewis is intentionally making him thick.
I think he might be trying to make a point so much that he almost made him super stupid.
Right.
But he makes the point. So there's that.
Which is, that's a good point. That's a good point to make, because he's not my favorite character at all. I do have some favorite characters, but it's definitely not. I actually enjoy Featherstone. I think he's just. He's deliciously deviant.
Is he a Grindelwald?
No,
I can't remember.
He's not a Grindel. He's not a Grindelwald. He's not smart enough to be Grindelwald. But he's just devious enough to stay ahead of the game. He's
like the villain from the first Iron Man.
Yes.
Played by
Jeff Bridges.
Jeff Bridges.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's just devious enough to stay ahead of the game until he doesn't.
Yes, until it catches up with him. So I think that's good. So anything else in this very beginning that strikes us? So she starts having dreams. Mark's uninterested. He's off, and he's get the chance to take part in this new organization. This is interesting. So Lewis says this is not about Durham. Right, he's not talking about Durham, the college.
Oh, yeah, the college.
Yeah. Every C.S. Lewis scholar that I've talked to said when Lewis says it's not about Durham, you can bet it's about Durham. That was exactly verbatim the quotes that I've got for people. Oh yeah, this is about Durham. So this is a knock on the college there. So
what is Durham?
It's just another small college. I don't know much about it other than I just know that that's a funny thing they keep saying. So I haven't delved in and deep enough and pulled that thread too much, but I think it's.
I hate to think he was being dishonest, but at the same time, maybe he didn't know he was being dishonest.
Well, sometimes he says a lot of things tongue in cheek, and he says, in his letters, he tells people, "You know my work better than I do." He's being. Sometimes the British are overly they oversell it to make a point. They don't really mean it as much. I had a lot of that happen in Britain where they were like, "Oh yeah, oh yeah, I'll do this, yeah, I'll do that," and it's like, no, I can't actually do that. But you said you would. They weren't really being dishonest. They were just trying to be overly polite and accepting. They weren't trying to be devious, but they wound up not fulfilling the thing. And you go, "Oh, okay." You probably had some of that while you were over there.
A little bit.
Yeah. So now we find out there are two. There's a dichotomy here, as we talked about. Nina brought up the great point that Jane goes to St. Anne's, and Mark goes off to Belbury, right? Now he has a big thing here, because if he takes the job at the NICE, he loses his fellowship, and he is so caught up on the money. I think that's one of the things that cracks me up. He's always going, "Hey, can I get some? How much am I going to get paid? What's what do I get compensated out of this? His whole thing is materially motivated about prestige and honor
Can't open the door.
and these things. And Jane's is just worried about what the heck's going on. Something's changing inside of me, and this is now I think what can also pull here is I found this very, very much fascinating that actually Jane, to me, she's the hero of the story.
Yeah, totally.
I think she's the hero. Mark is at best a sidekick, because he doesn't become chivalrous and hero-esque until the end. Spoiler alert. But so you have this thing where the woman is so you have the Green Lady, you have Jane, you have Lucy, you have the Blue Fairy, the Blue Angel. And I'm trying to think of all the women that Lewis elevates through his stories. Oriole in Until We Have Faces. It's awesome to see a guy who is labeled in today's humanities as being chauvinist and sexist, actually in these books promoting the feminine quality above the masculine quality. Because as David's pointed out, guy's a moron. And every man in the book actually is a moron, except for maybe
Dimble and Ransom.
And the rest of them are just kind of,
McPhee's smart.
He's smart, but he's bullheaded.
Yeah.
So there's that masculine quality of being singular-minded. Most of them are pretty much, the masculine is not elevated in this book at all. It's the feminine that's elevated in this book, which is interesting. I don't know what part that plays in looking at the language theme.
Well, I think I got that.
Okay.
So I think part of the Men Without Chests theme that he's got going on here is that the quality that these intellectuals are lacking is actually the emotive sort of like that vacuum that Mark has, that intuitive just understanding of human nature. And he even points it out at one point. Jane is thinking like, I can see through these guys and he can't.
Right.
And she knows, she can feel it. Mm-hmm. She's got that connection that's much stronger seemingly in women than men in general. Where she just can just read. She just reads the room. She knows exactly what's going on, and she knows.
Was she talking about Curry when he walked in the house, and she's like, "I don't trust him."
Featherstone.
Yeah, she's like,
but she also refers to Curry too.
Yes, like I don't trust these guys.
Yeah, when she met up with Curry that one time.
Yeah.
She made a comment about how she
exactly
didn't like him and never did.
And then Mark's like, "What? That's the duelist kind of guy. It's like he's like, I'm thick-headed."
So I think in some way he's saying in this book there's an element to femininity that men ought to embrace but that then you combine that with the intellectual life, and together you actually become a full person. But if you leave those two separate, then you're either an automaton or you're just driven completely by just feeling.
Could we say that a man with a chest is a being that has harmony with both imagination and reason?
One could.
I would. Twere I would say that, and I would emphatically make that a point of an essay and a thesis. But I digress. So I think it gets to be really fun when she starts toying around with the fact that she might actually be getting these dreams for a reason, and like, oh, there's something going on here, because every superhero has this moment, don't they? They have the moment where they begin to unlock this power inside of them they didn't know they had. So that's kind of her moment when she meets Ironwood. Miss Ironwood is like, no, you've got the gift. You're a seer. Like, whoa, what? You're a wizard, Harry, right? That moment when you
haven't gotten that far.
Batman's
not a superhero.
Which I love this. I love the meme where Obi-Wan's handing the lightsaber to Luke, and he's like, "Oh yeah, your father murdered a bunch of kids with this, and he wanted you to have it when you got old enough." But so Luke finding out that he's a part of this lineage, and a Jedi, and all these. So she's starting to unlock that, and I think that's a cool moment because Mark never has that. He doesn't have that unlocking moment where he has these supernatural powers. He's just a protagonist to move the narrative along, which is good because I think we could probably pull on it this way. Maybe I'll prove it to be wrong, but I think we pull on it this way. Mark is sort of an innocent man without a chest in a shark-filled water with devious men without chest. And so maybe Lewis is pulling and saying, here's somebody who is maliciously, willfully atrophied their chest. And here's someone who just never either wasn't taught or never actually engaged enough to have that harmony with imagination and reason. And you see the difference. The trajectory is going to be the same in the end unless something happens. And so I think that might be something that we'll see come to fruition. Maybe not. How far did you guys get in this?
4 on this one.
Chapter 4?
Yeah. I wanted to get farther, just didn't. What about you? Did you get far, Randy?
No. There's a reason why.
Got to the end of
I'm just
chapter 4.
listening. It's my Thanksgiving reading.
Gotcha.
That's going to be some good reading. So in chapter 4, what's orient?
I'm vibing with the abolition of man crossovers, but I have no connection.
Chapter 4 starts off with the liquidation of anachronisms. So this is when Mrs. Dimble comes over after the invasion of her house.
Oh yes. Okay.
The liquidation of what?
The liquidation of anachronisms, I think is what it says. Yep, anachronisms.
So what do we have we talked about the wood yet? Have we talked about Bragton wood, Bragton and Bragton,
Bragton and Brockton.
and how
why he wrote that. Does he talk about that later?
He does. He talks about that earlier. He kind of makes an allusion about how the families thought, oh, this is
Right, but I mean, does he elaborate on that at all later on, or is it just like?
Oh,
because I was like, I wonder why he makes a point of talking about this.
Well, I mean,
Bragton and Bragton, and I mean, is it just to show that some people are haughty and like to pretend they're something more than they are?
well, I would say yes, because how do you get
That's everybody at NICE.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And so it's language, right? We're still pulling on language. Well, it sounds similar, so it's equivalent. That could be another language trope that we're looking at here. Oh, it's close enough. I'm going to use this to gain authority and take over this and say, oh, Bragton, it's the same. It's just a mispronunciation or whatever. And so we're still pulling on that language thread through there. I think that's still a good thing. I'm having problems remembering right now. Did it talk about spending the afternoon in Bragton Wood?
Yeah.
Yeah, he said I spent the.
It's the only time the narrator inserts himself.
Goes
right?
I said I was there. That he apologized for locking me in later, an hour later.
That to me, I love that moment of that because he gets lost in. It's sort of that mythological moment where that's the transcendent moment of the book right there. That's a transcendent moment where he just lays down and cannon fired right there. What is it special about the wood? And he lays down in the wood and he just loses himself in the afternoon. There's something magical about this wood. He doesn't know what it is. The narrator doesn't know what it is. Mark doesn't. They don't care. Somebody knows what it is. NICE knows what it is that's special about the wood. But they don't try. They don't try to publicize that they want the wood, or they would never get it, right? And I'll wait to get into that because I think that's when we get into the deeper to the NICE. I think there's some really cool stuff to pull on that. Now, for me, as far as language goes, I think Lewis was on the nose with at least three things: withers, frost, 4 steel, and and NICE. Because what do tyrannical, diabolical people do? They accuse the other person of doing the thing that they're doing. Or they use terms like the People's Republic, when the people have nothing to do with it, but it sounds NICE. It sounds nice, right? And so that's a little bit on the nose there, which I borrowed that from him. I'm currently writing a mystery novel about my thesis, and instead of the NICE, I call it the KIND, the King's Institute of Neurological Development. So I thought that was the NICE it's on the nose, but it served a purpose. Anything else about this book that grabbed you guys, or something? Shane, you've read ahead. We can do a little spoiler alert if there's something you want to pull on that you read in the chapters ahead.
There's something in chapter 6, but I left my book at the house. So I'm trying to find it.
Okay.
In the book, but you can get back to me.
All right, keep looking at it. So, anything else, Nina? Anything that? So let me ask. I'll ask you a question. Why is this book your favorite? Because I know that you like this book.
I feel like I'll be able to better answer that once I reread it.
Okay.
I always thought I liked it because I was not as academic as everyone else, because I feel like Perelandra especially is so philosophical. And then I felt like this book did make my brain hurt. Like this one I understood, and it felt like a thriller of sorts. So it's, to me, I mean, it sounds kind of shallow, but I think I related more to what was going on. Maybe because it was not on another planet. I don't know.
Well, no, I think that's very astute, because it's a fairy tale. Fairy tales are supposed to be accessible. They're supposed to be out of the realm for anybody to grab a hold of.
I found, actually, it's weird because I found the language and the setting the least accessible when I first read it.
And that's what
high
people
schooler.
told me again and again, and I guess I didn't quite. And maybe it's because I have a particular fondness to stories that have to do with anything like this is post World War II, right? So this rise of a very Nazi type rule happens directly after after the World War II, and I think maybe that had because I've read a lot of books on that era, and those mean a lot to me. And so because it's this constant like, this is what man is capable of, this is what man does, and then they've just learned this sucks that this happened during World War II. All this stuff happened. Now let's do it ourselves because we're the smart ones.
You had a great phrase there. This is what man is capable of. And that is actually what God and Divine Council looked down and said when they were building the Tower of Babel. If we don't do something, look what man's capable of doing, they're going to make it. We're going to find a way to we need to scramble the language. And so I think this is what man is capable of.
And I think that's what fascinates me every time. And like all the disgusting garbage that goes on with NICE and the manipulation and the terror.
The head.
All of it.
Yes.
So, but, even it's just so representative of all the other times man has tried to manipulate and control other men. And I think that I've always been very attracted to stories like that. I don't know why. I think it's because I have a very... I don't know.
Do you like books like 12 Years a Slave and stuff like that?
I've not read that one. Okay. But I read... mostly, I've read a lot of stories and with mostly Christians who walked through World War II era. Mostly, not all. Whether it's Elie Wiesel, Corrie ten Boom, Evidence Not Seen, can't think of the name of the author there, but all of these who walked with hope, some hope beyond
Frankel,
the darkness.
Dittman.
And Dittman, Anita Dittman, Viktor Frankl, all these people who walked through the darkest time, I mean, in close history to us. And I think I've always been so inspired by those stories, because it's like, how could man be so awful? But also, how did these people walk through that awful time and still come out on the other end as whole human beings, in a sense, with they had some joy and some hope beyond themselves that carried them through. And I think it fascinates me because I struggle in periods of my life when things are going on in the world, and I am like, if you pop me right into World War II, if I can't handle what's going on in the world today, how would I have ever survived that time? But that's why I read those stories, because they always remind me it's possible. And I don't know, that's why I talk, if you ever read anything that I write, it's like I always talk about the saints that walk before us. And I think that's probably one of the reasons I like this book so much.
Yeah, that's a good one. I'm kind of I have a similar affinity for stories lately about like black Christian voices who came out of slavery. It is an incredible testament to the power of the good news that there are black Christian churches still thriving in this country, and that in many ways are leading the way in a lot of different areas for us. And like that, God broke through slave masters who literally took books out of the Bible and then handed them a fake one and said, "This is what it is." And yet God still broke through that. And I was just like, that's, to me, is unbelievable. That like you cannot stop God. He will break through even evil.
I think I need that reminder all the time.
So good.
Yeah, because that's why we went overseas and we did that tour of Europe when we visited like 7 different concentration camps. I'm like, how did people survive this? And then just even being there in the ruins, you're like, you can barely stand it. And they were there when it was all breathing life and death. And we, at the same period of time, we interviewed several people who lived through the civil rights era. That was black then when we talked to, because I was on the same hunt. How did people find joy and hope in the midst of that kind of adversity and oppression? And I think any time I read those stories, I don't know, maybe it's that beyond us too, where it reminds us that God breaks through every bit of darkness, every lie, every terror of man. Sometimes man succeeds in his evil deeds and plans, but ultimately you can't change what is true.
Yeah.
There was a Russian dissident, and I don't remember his name, but the story was so impactful to me. While he was in prison, you could only read the Stalinist book on Marxism, and that was the Bible. This was the status. Like this is what. There's no God. There's the atheist manual of Stalinism and statism. And he said, if there is a God, he is the exact opposite of what's in this book. And he began to read the book. He found God because when he would read something, he was like, God is the opposite of this. God is the opposite of this. And he became a Christian by reading the atheist book of Marxism and Stalinism. And you can't stop God. It's like, C.S. Lewis says, you have to be careful what books you read as a young atheist, because they'll trip you up. Because God's around every corner. He's the hound of heaven chasing you down, and you cannot get it. There's always the 2 hobbits running around, right? There's always the. We read Madame L'Engle, and Meg is sitting there with the it thing, and just what's the one thing that destroyed it? It wasn't intelligence, it wasn't power, it wasn't brute force, it was love. Yep. You go, why? That sounds corny, but
yeah, that's what's interesting. Like just from what I know of this book, and then and Lewis in general, and then I read 1984, which I think is oftentimes placed side by side with this book because of some of the technocracy kind of concerns and stuff like that. But Lewis apparently was really critical of 1984 and called it repulsive rather than tragic, I mean, there's a sadness that you get in the end of it, but I think it's because of like what Dina's saying, like that just ends on that note where 2 + 2 = 5. And, you know, and I think that this offers something very different.
Yeah, there's definitely hope in this book. I think that's the difference.
Well, ultimately, good overcomes.
Yeah.
Beauty will save. You know, Solzhenitsyn's like that. Beauty, you won't be able to stop it. There'll be, you can try to plug all the holes, but you can't. In my understanding of evil is that the ancient one, the bent one, has a limited amount of knowledge, and therefore he thinks he's covered all the angles, and yet God still breaks through. God says, like, I'll use your angle. I'll use your angle to defeat you. If the prince of the world had known who he was, they would not have crucified. The devil's like, I got you. God's like, go for it, man. Go for it, because I'm about to rain down. I'm about to reverse everything you've done. And I'm going to use your angle. I'm going to use your bent to bring salvation and hope. And so I think that's just fantastic. Another interesting thing about this story that for me always played in my mind is everybody talks about where did Germany become, where did Hitler get his ideas? He got his ideas from the universities. The stuff, the eugenics and all the stuff that he was talking about, the pure race and stuff, that was all being taught at the highest levels, the upper echelons in Germany. And at that time, the German universities were some of the greatest in the world. This was the stuff that was being taught throughout there.
And right, that's I underlined that part where, is it Feverstone or Feverstone?
Feverstone.
Feverstone. And he's talking about man's got to take charge of man. Some men have got to take charge of the rest. You and I want to be the people who do the taking charge, not the ones who are taken charge of. And he said, what sort of thing you have in mind? Quite simple and obvious things at first. Sterilization of the unfit, liquidation of backward races. We don't want any dead weights. Selective breeding. Then real education, including prenatal education. By real education, I mean one that has no take it or leave it nonsense. A real education makes the patient what it wants infallibly. Whatever he or his parents try to do about it. Of course, it'll have to be mainly psychological at first, but we'll get on the biochemical conditioning in the end and direct manipulation of the brain. And I was like, there it is. Obviously, he's telling what he's just experienced, I would assume, from Hitler and his Nazis taking over Europe. But
I think it's important to remember that we were doing that everywhere, including in the U.S. and Britain, that kind of stuff. So, where did Hitler's ideas come from? They came from us, in a way.
Well, I mean, where do all ideas come from? They come from the intellectual elites,
yeah.
And they say, "Well, do this. This is the thing. You need to do this. You need to do this," and that's where most of the power is centralized. Yes. So you're reading that.
Talking about Hitler and the universities.
Yes.
He got his education, and that's of course, Lewis is alluding to that, I would imagine.
So, what I was going to say is, this reminds me of Jordan-Peterson saying, I was a young socialist. He goes, and we were going to change the world, but we were going to start with everyone else. Right? And that is, it's for your own good. It's for your own good. The language of villains, it's for your own good. Every time I see a villain coming out, like, we're gonna make things better. It's for your own good. As Randy pointed out, the U.S. was doing that too. Mm-hmm. Now, because centralized power, concentrated power, creates this notion of, oh, I know better than you. Let me take care. I'm going to do this for your own good. Oh yeah, I'm going to sell you horses into slavery, and I'm going to sell you Narnians into slavery. It's for your own good. And so anytime you start to hear that stuff, I red flag and check that and go, let me see what comes out of this. Let me see what your behavior is, because that language is a Thanos language, right? And so
I think though too, there's another. It's not like just that though, because like with Hitler, it was really self-interest was what drove most of his stuff. and then same with other tyrants and so on. Like I was just listening to interesting Cuban guy talking about the disaster of the Cuban Revolution and Castro and all that. And Castro was a genius, actually. Like that time he fooled the American reporters into thinking that they were had a humongous army by having them walk around them in circles and not knowing that they were just circling back around and just looked like one continuous line. And then the American papers reported on it, and then the guy who's currently in power thought that was real and then just left because he thought that they held all the power. But he talked about Castro's bent, which was more often than not tell me what you want. Okay, I'll do that thing. And then he would kind of do that thing, and really behind the closed doors he was just doing everything for himself, but he was living in luxury while the rest of his people were actually living in abject poverty. It was...
So I think that's a great point to bring up, because somebody asked Jordan-Peterson one time about Hitler. He's like, well, Hitler didn't win the war, and you go, you're assuming that was his goal.
Right, we were talking about this last week or the week before.
Did I talk about this?
I think so.
I talk about this a lot because it's just so. It just was that Hitler's goal, or was Hitler's goal to set Europe on fire and just bring as much suffering and destruction as he could? Because if that was his goal, he did that, and so but you also start to hear the language of a thousand year reign and all this kind of stuff, and I think I'm going to throw a little. I mentioned in my email. I think there's a little bit of corrupted ancient wisdom in a lot of these tyrants, and I think you'll see for me, I think there's a little bit of Nephilim in that hideous strength that I think we'll get to later on in the book. That strikes me is when I start to hear the language of 1,000-year rules and these kinds of things. You go, one man's not smart enough to pull all that together, right? There's some stuff going on. There has to be some ancient technology, some ancient thinking, some ancient strategies going on here that are transcendent of this person's just a vessel. In that sense, for some of this stuff, so some of it is the depravity of man when you let man go. But I think there's another layer there, and especially when you read this and you hear Strake, and you start hearing some of the stuff that they talk about, and you go, oh yeah, this is deeper. So, but these are. I
don't know about Hitler's motivations though, because if he was doing that, then he was stocking up a lot of art and preparing a lot of things for himself that seem to be very counter to the idea that I'm just gonna give it a go and all this. He had all sorts of plans for what he was gonna do with different locations. He invested tons of money into designing different parts of the Mediterranean for how he was gonna power the whole European continent by hydroelectric power, by blocking out the Mediterranean Sea and stuff like this. He was a long-term thinker. I don't know if that was his ultimate goal. Although I'm sure. I think honestly, hearing about some of his early stuff, dude, he was really smart, but he was kind of crazy. He had a lot of mental problems.
So that could.
They manifested.
Yeah.
Well, that is, and again, so you pull on that, and you see people who have these multiple, maybe he had multiple personalities, or maybe he had schizophrenia, or just crazy. So you wonder sometimes how much of that is just human depravity, how much of that is influence.
Yeah, that is a good question. How much of it comes just basically straight up demonic, not necessarily in the way that we often westernize demonic activity, but just there's more to it than we seem to think. I think, and there's also the faith science aspect is not exclusive.
Exactly.
There's more to it.
And so I think we'll get into that later. We're going to pull on these threads a lot in this book.
Yeah.
That right there is going to come through. So I think we're setting that up for a good spot to end. That we're going to get into all these things. So a very relevant book, as well as most of Lewis's stuff is pretty relevant.
Wasn't it? Were we talking about that last week? How a lot of people call his work prophetic. Were we talking about that here?
I think you and I were talking about
Oh,
that.
you and I were talking about.
We were talking about it.
Oh, I
Yes, that's why we.
A lot of people are, say how prophetic his books and his writings are, but really he was just talking about the time he was living in. And it's, exactly. And it's like history repeats. Like, obviously, I'm sure he understood that probably better than most. But he was talking about what was happening when he was living.
But if you follow a line of logic and you lay it out correctly and you prioritize the information in the correct thing, you're going to nail the conclusion. If you do the math, if you do the equation correctly, you're going to get the right answer. So it doesn't matter if you're standing here or you look into the future. If you can calculate the trajectory correctly, you're going to hit the mark. And that's what writing that has a prescriptive, very good prescriptive, very good descriptive, will be predictive in the end. Huxley's proven to be, Orwell and Huxley and all these things. You're starting to see some of the stuff. Why? Because they had the right prescription and the right description, and when you put those together correctly, you actually come out with a predictive notion of this is what could happen. And sometimes it's self-fulfilling, and sometimes it's just human nature. But if you ask me, I think a lot of this it repeats itself because the enemy doesn't sleep. He's going to keep trying to do this.
I think it also repeats itself in almost ways that are difficult to detect while you're in them too.
Absolutely.
In more complex ways than even like a prophetic text will claim. You read Isaiah, for example. It's pretty clear, but it's not spot on,
right?
And it's so much more beautifully complex when it actually happens. But
it's easier to look back and say, "Oh, that's prophetic," than it is to be in the middle of it and go, "Oh, this is happening right now." Yeah.
It's an interesting one.
All right. Well, I think we can end it here for tonight. This has been a good introduction on the anniversary of C.S. Lewis's death, Aldous Huxley's death, and JFK, one of the most popular presidents probably in American history. Well, let's say at least top 5, top 6 in there.
Top 40.
Top 40. I would say top 40. Yeah.
I really hope so.
Well, this has been VFF at Drinkling's Coffee House in Wilmore, Kentucky. And we'll see you next week. Further up.
Further in.